Hey everybody, welcome to episode 66 of the Is That Normal podcast. And today we're starting a two-part series about blowing it.
Right, right. So we are humans, and humans are flawed and finite and sinful and selfish. And so every one of us, at some point, some of us more often than others, we're going to let people down. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall short. And so today we want to talk about the fact that that's going to happen. And especially as we talk about parenting ourselves and our kids, it's going to happen. So what do we do when it happens? And so today particularly, we're going to start out by talking about what we do when our kids are the ones who blow it.
Yeah, and that's kind of a difficult question because, we depending on how we react, our reactions can kind of range from one extreme to the other, from pretending like it didn't happen and not dealing with it to overreacting and maybe making the situation worse. And
Absolutely.
so we'll start. It's story time. Did you ever do anything to really embarrass your parents?
I'm sure there's a bunch of examples out there that I could come up with. Or if you ask, my mom, she would come up with some that she would share with you. But one really has stuck in my mind. It's like one of those moments that you don't know why, but it's like this vivid memory.
Yeah.
And I don't know how old I was. I had to at least been 7 or 8. That's the youngest I could have been. Or maybe it was even a little older than that. But we were at my house, and it was an evening, and we had some company over, and we were all sitting around the living room, and I was sitting on the floor. And I guess somewhere in this process, I just had to let a couple of them rip. I had, I don't know what we'd eaten, if we'd eaten beans, but man, I let out, some pretty juicy farts there. And, and nobody really noticed or said anything. But what stuck in my mind about it mostly is after that company left, my dad very calmly asked me to come in and sit down and just said, "Hey, bud, if you ever are in a public setting or we got company over and you got to do that, man, please go to the bathroom and take care of that there. Don't do that out in public like that." And I was mortified because I just didn't think about it. You're home, you're comfortable, and whatever happens, right? and so that really stuck with me for two reasons. One, I was embarrassed that I had done that, and embarrassed my parents that way after I realized what the significance was. But also, my dad was so calm about that, which was not necessarily normally the way my dad operated. And when we lived on a farm and we were out doing a lot of farm chores, and if you did something wrong, it was nothing for him to yell, throw things, use language that we will never say on our podcast. All those kind of things happen. Right. And so for him to say that calmly almost made a deeper impression for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So today, as we talk about that, we're thinking about what we do when our kids do things that are broken or wrong. How do we respond? We need to think about healthy ways to make a positive impact on our kids when that happens.
Yeah. Well, welcome back. We are so glad you're joining us and checking out the podcast, and hope that you're enjoying these episodes, and be sure we always love feedback. So be sure to comment and respond on our social media channels and let us know what you think. And so today we're talking about our kids blowing it, and we probably mean something, we're probably talking about something maybe a little more challenging than a fart story, even though everybody loves a good fart story.
Especially if there's any parents of middle schoolers listening, you can share that one with their kids.
Yes, absolutely.
They will definitely laugh.
So what are we talking about when we really talk about our kids blowing it?
Yeah, and I think there's a spectrum of what that means. There's everything from just inexperience, our kids doing things because they don't know any better, to just the boneheadedness of us, being humans that make bad choices, that look at things wrong at a certain time, that don't think our decisions all the way through, to out and out rebellion, saying, I'm doing this on purpose, rejecting what you're telling me to do, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the episode, because there are some differences in how we respond to some of those different things, but I think there's also some basic common things about those situations and how we as parents need to view those as we respond. And one of them is remembering the goal. A book we've mentioned often is Growing With, out of Fuller Seminary. Dr. Carapal and Stephen Argue wrote this book, and in it they define what they think growing with parenting to be like, which is what their recommendation is that it's a mutual journey of intentional growth. And so that definition helps us see that we're looking for that way out there long term goal or where we're going to land, not this immediate moment. And when we think about things that way, we realize that we're not just trying to fix a problem, we're not just trying to manage a situation, but that we are trying to intentionally build value, character, a learning opportunity for our kids when this happens. So that's going to greatly change how we approach, I think, blowing it situations. Another thing I think that's basically anytime your kid does anything like this is recognizing their increasing need for independence. Sometimes we have to stop and evaluate the situation, and we talk about this in some prior episodes. Is this rebellion? Is this wrong? Or is this just them trying out, making their own decisions, being their own person? And we got to kind of figure that out. So it's going to be really normal, especially as you move from adolescence into young adulthood. You go through those teen years that kids are going to push away, and they're going to try things different than the way you've done them because they're trying to figure out who they are and what being an adult looks like for them. And we have to sometimes allow that and encourage that. I think in that, them learning from their mistakes at those adolescent stages is super important.
Yeah. And we've kind of talked about in multiple different episodes, just, finding that balance really evaluating based on, kind of where your child is in that development and what age they are as to, how extreme or how hands-on or in some cases how hands-off we are in trying to help them navigate through, some of those situations when they mess up.
Right. I read a book recently by Andy Stanley called Making Better Decisions and Having Fewer Regrets. And one of the things that really stood out to me, and I've thought about a lot since I read it, is he said his dad at a very early age, he said probably earlier than he should have, started letting me make a lot of my own decisions. Instead of telling me what to do, he said, what do you think is the best thing to do? And I think we have to be very intentional about that. And, and obviously there's some boundaries there, but the earlier we can let kids make significant decisions that have actual consequences, where we can still support them and guide them through it, it's going to teach them how to stand on their own, which is so important. Is what we need for them in some ways to learn how to do. And so with that, we have to allow their decisions and natural consequences to stand, and that's super valuable. We don't want to come in and take away all the pain or all the decisions. We've got to allow that to happen there, and then we also have to value the relationship. We've said this before, is that we don't want to fight with them, we want to fight for them. And so we don't fight and argue. We're not attacking them. We're not calling them names. We're not saying what's wrong with you. I mean, those are all, and honestly, I mean, those are things that we're going to be tempted to do. I've been tempted to do that. We want to keep that relationship as a highest goal, and how we deal with that, and so that we make that a safe place for them to acknowledge their mistake, to deal with their consequences and repent of what they've done. And we don't do that by making them feel judged and unvaluable in that situation.
Because like you said, in the heat of the moment, it's easy to have those knee-jerk reactions and go, what were you thinking? And let our temper or our frustrations, boil over, and we handle things in a way that is not valuable and doesn't help move forward in helping them to grow from
not
from the situation, not productive.
Not that mutual journey towards intentional growth.
Absolutely. So what are some practical ways that we can respond?
So I think there's a lot of really hands-on things that we can make decisions every day to do, and some of these I got from a book that Dr. Tim Kimmel wrote called Why Christian Kids Rebel. And it's actually an older book. I don't know exactly how old it is. It's probably almost 20 years old or older. But I find it to just have really timeless truths about the fact that our kids are going to make choices, and sometimes intentional choices, to walk away from what's best and what we ask them to do. But there's some really practical ways that we can approach helping them with that. And one of the things he says is that we need to approach it with a balance of consequence and sorrow, recognizing that the child is the one who's ultimately able and responsible to solve this problem. I think that's one of the biggest temptations for all parents for all time, and right now maybe more than ever, is that we want to go in and we want to fix it. and we want to take away the consequence, and we want to push this thing through to the outcome that we want, but I need to let them be the one to decide to change. I can't change this for them. And so I think that's really, really good. And so here's some ideas on what that looks like. Number one is that we got to start with God and His truth. A great place to start is praying. when this happens, take a breath, take some time, pray about it. Sometimes responding in the moment is not the best thing. If there's an immediate danger to someone's life or property, we got to intervene. But otherwise, it might be best to give it 6 or 8 or 12 hours and before you make your final response, and spend that time praying. I think we also have to seek the Bible. What is the truth about this situation, about my children, about their relationship with God? Seek godly counsel. Find other people who you respect their opinion and how they've handled things with their children. Seek advice. I think that's some really good places to start.
And I think probably every one of us, if we were able to objectively in that moment think about, if I took, whether that's an hour or 4 hours or whatever that is, away from this situation and spent some time in prayer, what is the likelihood that my response would be different than it's going to be right now? Right. I think if we could all objectively ask that question, the answer is always going to be yes, it's going to be significantly different.
Yes,
and
better. Yes.
So that taking that time sometimes when it's appropriate and you're able to do that, to step back, I think is probably a huge, hugely
and
important.
I think it helps us. Again, we can't go in and fix everything. We have to realize that God has got more control and more desire and more influence over our children than we ever will. And so so if we take that time and we spend that time seeking what God wants, I think it's going to help us remember that. So. The next thing I would say is don't try to save face. This is huge temptation, I think, especially if it's a big, nasty, hairy thing that's happened, which happens sometimes. Your child is the one who made that decision. They're the one who's going to have to own that and face those consequences. Now, if we've had a part in any of this, or there's a piece of this that's our fault, we need to own that. We need to own that first. And actually, the next episode is going to talk about that. Part 2 is going to talk about that when we've blown it. How do we deal with that? But we need to not apologize, sanitize, or hide for our children. We need to let them own their choice, own their consequences, and realize the weight and the significance of that.
Yeah, very good.
And so with that, then we got to let consequences do their job. So that'd be the third thing we have to do. I know for me, my parents did a really good job of that, and we've tried to set this up for our children too. When you have responsibility, there needs to be an obvious and immediate consequence to what happens if you don't keep that responsibility. I know for us, a real tangible thing is as we've raised different animals. If you don't feed your animal, and it's going to die, and that's going to be on you, and there's this natural consequence there. But in everything, I think we've got to set up that situation where if you abuse a privilege, a driving privilege, a trust privilege that I've given you to be somewhere on your own, and you abuse that, you do something that's wrong, you do something that's illegal, you're not where you told me to be, obviously there's going to be consequences to that. Both you lose that trust and that privilege, but then there may be things that you're responsible to other people for because of what you chose to do that was incorrect. And so we've got to do that for people. I love Dr. Kimmel in his book, just kind of sharing some of the ways that he would word things. When you have your child who makes a choice to do something that you've established is outside the boundaries, you can say, I feel really sorry for you because you made that choice. What is that going to cost you? And that puts that responsibility back on them, realizing they're the one who made the choice and that they're going to have there's a cost to what they did. I think that's really well said.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, tying back to discussions we've had in previous episodes where we talk about, when you talk about allowing at times those consequences to do their job, creating that environment that is, a realistic replication of what's going to happen later in life in a safe environment for them.
Right. Yes, yeah,
giving
I love
them
that.
space to fail.
I say this all the time, and this is in so many things. This is both with discipline issues and trust issues, obedience issues, but even like for us with education issues, I would rather them face things that are difficult and potentially have significant consequences. While I still am here, it can be a safety umbrella for them. I'm not gonna solve that all for them, but I'm still here to be a resource to help them navigate that, and learn consequences when we can still maybe handle that. So yeah, I agree. And that's kind of the last thing that we practically can do is as this happens, we got to keep communication open. Got to remember that relationship is really important. We need to deal with the situation that they've blown it in, but we don't need to overemphasize or nag. After we've dealt with it, they understand their consequence. We've established that. Don't keep bringing that back out and saying, "Can you believe you did this?
Yeah.
Can you believe you did this?" Don't add bitterness to this mistake they've already made. We need to move on. We need to love them. We need to live life. We need to still laugh. We need to still do the same things we do all the time, and move forward from that as best as we can. We got to show them that we still love them and value them. And as we do that, and we show them that we value them, not just what they do, it continues to make that place a safe place for them to acknowledge what they've done wrong, to accept the cost, and then to repent, which is, again, the end goal is this restoration with us and with God that we want to see them have.
Yeah. So as we kind of navigate this and try to implement these things that we're talking about, what's the outcome? It's
right.
We don't guarantee that the outcome's always going to be exactly the way that we would script it.
No, we can't give any guarantees. We can do all the right things. God did all the right things, obviously, and his children still rebelled and ran the other way and continue to do that. So no, there's no guarantee. I do believe as we do this, we can foster an environment where it's more likely. Yeah. But we do our part and we trust the rest to them and God. They have a decision to make and God is involved in the process. And so we have to have some trust there as we do our part. But also don't give up.
Yeah.
It's shared very often, but I think it's so appropriate for us to always think about this as parents. There's the parable Jesus told of the prodigal son. And really, if you really look at that, there's two sons there and they both have different but big issues that they need to deal with. But for that one that rejected his father's ways, said, "You're dead to me. I want to take my inheritance now and go do what I want." And he went and made really terrible choices. He eventually came to his senses, but it took a lot of time. But that father never gave up hope. As we read that, the father was standing on the horizon, watching and waiting, not knowing when his son was going to come back, but ready when he was to run, grab him, and offer forgiveness and repentance. And so we need to be that kind of parent, I think, always hopeful, always doing the best part that we can, and trust the rest of them in God. I think really kind of sum all this up as we think about our kids blowing it. Bob Goff, he's a lot of things. He's a lawyer. He's an author. He's a ministry coordinator. He does missions work, and so he does a lot of things. But he is a great storyteller, and I think that he puts it best when he talked about his wedding day, because he said when he got married, he was just kind of getting out of college, everything, didn't have a lot of money, was very busy trying to start his career, and so they didn't have a lot of time or resources, and so they tried to make their wedding as economical as possible. And so then they start talking about the wedding cake, and he realized pretty quickly the wedding cake that his future wife wanted was going to cost more than the rest of the wedding was going to cost. And then he remembered that there was a young man that he went to a youth program that Bob was teaching and leading at, whose father owned a bakery. And so he gets this high school kid and says, "Hey, do you think you could get me a wedding cake for $150? He's like, "Yeah, man, we'll get you like a 4-story wedding cake." So he shows up to his wedding. It's coming in, and he sees this kid there unloading this wedding cake and putting the cake on this AV cart next to his vehicle. And the kid's like putting all 4 layers, and it's got these towers and spires, and he builds this huge cake on this cart. And then as soon as he goes to start taking it to the building, the whole thing topples. And so before anybody sees, Bob goes over and grabs this kid and grabs all this mashed up cake and goes over and puts it in the cart, and he says, "If you can go back and get a big vat of icing, what do you think we could do?" And he's like, "Well, we could probably put this thing back together." So the kid runs, goes back, gets icing, and they put together this like asphalt and broken cake masterpiece that nobody knew that anything had changed. And I just love that story because we are like that wedding cake. We have these pictures of what we think life's going to be like, but then we hit bumps and we hit problems and we make the wrong choices and we put things in the wrong order and we topple and we're a mess on the pavement. But if we are willing to offer forgiveness, Bob could have flipped his lid on that kid, right? But we chose to respond with grace and forgiveness, and we look for a solution to get through this, and we have people make the choices to say, hey, I don't know if we make this right, but we can make this better if we make this choice. Then sometimes God allows us to put together a beautiful mess. And I think that's a lot of what parenting looks like to me.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up today, our 2 takeaways. The first is just to think about, maybe evaluate your reaction to how we respond when our kids blow it, and maybe look for those opportunities this week, and think about maybe thinking about some of these things as you respond, as opposed to maybe how you would initially have that knee-jerk reaction. And then the second is to join us in 2 weeks for part 2 of this, when we kind of flip the script a little bit and we talk about what to do when we blow it with our kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Be abnormal.